Part 1. London, 1812, where the ton gathered beneath chandeliers to witness scandal disguised as dance, and where titles mattered almost as much as diamonds, though not quite as much as a well-placed whisper. It was at the Duke of Elverton's annual masquerade, a glittering affair of feathers, violins, and veiled insults, that the first true tremor of intrigue rippled through the drawing rooms of Mayfair. The guest list was, as ever, impeccable. Dukes, viscounts, dowagers, and debutantes floated across the polished floors like so many gilded swans. But it was not the Duchess of Halbridge sapphires, nor even Lady Turlington's scandalously sheer gown, which caused at least one footman to trip and drop an entire tray of ratafia, that earned the gasps that night. No, dearest listeners, the true sensation arrived not from the gilded carriages, but from the servants' entrance. She was introduced as Miss Juliana Wetherford, a new maid in the household of the eccentric and widowed Lady Bexley, who had a fondness for hiring American girls and wearing turbans far too large for her frame. Juliana was supposedly meant only to assist with the older ladies' dressing and embroidery silks. Yet somehow, mysteriously, delightfully, she found herself not in the retiring rooms, but in the ballroom itself, holding a tray of champagne as though she'd been born to it. Now, you may ask, how did a servant come to infiltrate the highest echelons of society unnoticed? But that is precisely the question the ton failed to ask. Too enraptured were they by the girl's luminous gray eyes, her straight bearing, and the faint, indefinable something that clung to her like a secret waiting to be told. And there, across the room, stood His Royal Highness Prince Benedict Alastair Thorne, third son of the king, but first in charm, scandal, and the occasional duel. The prince, whose jawline had caused an entire generation of portrait artists to swoon, and whose exploits were so legendary one could hardly throw a fan in Mayfair without striking a lady who claimed to have danced with him, or at the very least, imagined it. He was bored, the kind of boredom reserved for men who have had too much privilege, too many dances, and far too little resistance. Until he saw her, not the Countess of Darnley, who had been fluttering around him all evening like an over-perfumed moth. Not Lady Arabella, whose laugh was likened to crystal, and whose fortune was even larger than her dowry. No, his gaze caught on the girl in plain muslin, balancing a tray of glasses with the poise of a queen. Her mouth quirked not in coy invitation, but in barely concealed amusement, as though she found the parade before her entirely ridiculous. "Who is that?" the prince asked, turning to his cousin, Lord Cyril. Cyril, whose knowledge of the ton's lineage exceeded even the Almanach de Gotha, peered and frowned. "No idea. A foreign relation, perhaps? Though she carries herself like a governess. A governess would blush. This one looks as though she's judging us all." Judge she did. Juliana did not know the etiquette of curtsying to royalty, nor did she particularly care. She had been born in Boston, raised among books and rebellion, and carried across the sea only after her father's debts and death left her with little more than a battered volume of Shakespeare and a stubborn sense of pride. Lady Bexley had taken her in as a companion of sorts, though the dowager's household was so disorganized that no one quite knew whether Juliana was guest, servant, or something in between. And now, here she stood, in the center of the ballroom, entirely unaware, or rather, entirely unimpressed by the fact that a prince was approaching her. "Miss," Prince Benedict said, plucking a glass from her tray with a gallant bow that would have made lesser women swoon. "You seem to be enjoying the spectacle." Juliana raised a brow. "I find peacocks diverting, Your Highness." A pause. A beat. A sharp inhale from Lady Farnsworth, who had been eavesdropping behind a fern. The prince laughed. Dear readers, this was not a polite titter or a court-appropriate chuckle. It was a full, rich, delighted laugh, the kind that startled even the footmen and sent Lady Arabella's fan snapping in half. "If we are peacocks," Benedict murmured, "then you, madam, are the hawk who sees straight through our feathers." "I suppose it depends on the season," Juliana replied, her tray still balanced effortlessly on one hand. "And the feathers. Oh, how the ton whispered that night." A maid, though no one could quite confirm it, had spoken to the prince not with reverence, but wit. And he had lingered. He had lingered, dearest listeners, for a full 5 minutes, conversing with her as though she were not only his equal, but his entertainment. By morning, her name, or some approximation of it, was on every tongue. Miss Weathering? Miss Weatherby? That American girl with the eyes? Speculation abounded. Was she an heiress in disguise? A foreign duchess hiding from scandal? A spy? The latter theory was advanced by Lord Dithering, who had once mistaken his own valet for a French agent. But while the matrons gossiped and the debutantes fumed, Prince Benedict sought her out again, this time at Lady Bexley's townhouse. He arrived under the pretext of returning a fan the old lady had left at the ball, a fan which, this author knows for a fact, Lady Bexley never owned. He was admitted. Of course, royalty is never turned away, even when bearing false accessories. Miss Wetherford, he said, when he found her alone in the library. Yes, dearest readers, the library, where all manner of improper things have been known to occur. I have been thinking of feathers. Juliana, seated cross-legged upon a ladder rung and leafing through a volume of Addison, glanced down. Have you, your highness? That seems a rather singular pursuit. I have wondered, he continued, undeterred, whether the hawk might ever consent to dance with the peacock. She closed the book gently. Only if the peacock learns to fly. And with those words, dear hearts, the game began. He returned again, and again, under increasingly flimsy excuses, a book borrowed, a question about Lady Bexley's views on astrology, an inquiry into whether Americans truly preferred tea or coffee. Each time, Juliana met him not with simpering admiration, but with barbed honesty and reluctant amusement. The prince, accustomed to flirtation and flattery, found himself entranced. But just as affection began to bloom, a shadow fell. Lady Sophronia Greaves, doyen of the season and mother of 5 unmarried daughters, declared Juliana a dangerous upstart, and swore to uncover her origins. For what, after all, could a maid possibly want from a prince, if not a crown? Ah, but dear listeners, you and I know better. Juliana Wetherford wanted no crown. She wanted only to be seen for who she was, not what she was born. And as for the prince, he was beginning to see far more clearly than society ever intended. By the 3rd week of March, when crocuses dared to bloom and scandal dared to blossom faster, Miss Juliana Wetherford had become the unfortunate centerpiece of every tea-table speculation from Grosvenor Square to Berkeley Street. And all without the benefit of a single formal introduction. Astonishing, is it not? But such is the magnetic pull of mystery, particularly when paired with a face that could make even Lady Bramble's parrot cease its infernal squawking. Prince Benedict, for his part, began to loiter, not in the idle manner of disinterested nobility, but with the unmistakable purpose of a man who had discovered something novel in the capital, a woman who did not attempt to charm him. He was seen, more than once, emerging from Lady Bexley's townhouse with ink on his cuffs and a faint furrow between his brows, a sign, this author suspects, of intellectual exertion, though the Ton interpreted it as indigestion. Why, Benedict, his elder brother, the Duke of Clarence, said one morning over a rather limp breakfast sausage, you appear contemplative. Has some dowager's daughter forced you to consider matrimony? Nothing so dire, Benedict replied, folding his newspaper with more force than necessary. I've been considering the curious notion of merit. Merit? Clarence blinked. Is that a horse? But let us leave the breakfast table and return to the real theater, the parlor. On a damp Thursday, Juliana found herself summoned not by Lady Bexley, who had taken to napping in the conservatory with a shawl over her face, but by the prince himself. He had sent a note, through proper channels, of course, requesting her presence at the Royal Academy's private viewing of Mr. Turnbull's Landscapes, a rather dull affair known for its tepid punch and over-enthusiastic use of clouds. Lady Bexley, upon hearing of it, had merely waved a hand and muttered something about young blood needing exercise. Juliana arrived precisely on time, wearing a gown of pale green cambric, plainly cut, but impeccably fitted. It was not the dress that captured attention, however, but the way she walked through the gallery as though she had every right to be there, which, by the standards of the Ton, was precisely what made her so dangerous. You came, Benedict said, standing beside a seascape that resembled a bowl of porridge. You asked, Juliana replied, though I confess I expected something more diverting than fog and fishing boats. You are not wrong, he said, but I hoped you might help me find something worth looking at. And if I do, I shall owe you a favor. Princes ought not to deal in debts. Then let us call it a wager. He offered his arm, and she took it with all the composure of a bishop at a bake sale. They walked slowly, pausing before a canvas of such violent muddy hues that even the artist's signature seemed embarrassed. You truly find this engaging? She asked. I find your commentary far superior to the brushwork, Benedict said. Besides, I am conducting an experiment. On art. On perception. I wish to know whether a woman born outside our system can see more clearly than those raised within it. And what have you discovered thus far? She asked, pausing before a painting of a shipwrecked sailor embraced by a mermaid of improbable proportions. That clarity is often mistaken for impertinence. Only by those who benefit from fog, Juliana replied. Ah, dear readers, the tension was no longer idle flirtation. It had ripened into something taut and unwelcome to anyone invested in a tidy social hierarchy. For while the prince was no stranger to liaisons, this was something else entirely. He was not merely entertained, he was engaged. And the ton? They noticed. At a musicale hosted by the Marchioness of Barrington, whose soprano was said to make milk curdle, Lady Sophronia Greaves launched her offensive. While Juliana stood in the corner, pretending to study a portrait of a rather red-faced ancestor, Lady Sophronia approached Prince Benedict with the delicacy of a cannonball. Your Highness, she said, I do hope you are enjoying yourself. These little entertainments are so vital to morale, don't you agree? Vital, Benedict murmured, glancing toward Juliana. Lady Sophronia followed his gaze with a sniff. One does worry, of course, when certain persons begin to receive attention beyond their station. It is so very easy to mistake novelty for value. Benedict turned to her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. And yet, Lady Sophronia, value is so rarely found among the expected. Touché, Your Highness. Later that evening, as the final notes of a German aria faded into blessed silence, Benedict and Juliana found themselves on the stone balcony, the air cool with promise. I believe I have become the subject of considerable disapproval, she said, not looking at him. Then you are finally interesting enough to matter, he replied. She turned then. Do you understand what it would mean if you pursued this? If you made me visible? I am not interested in shadows, he said, nor in pretending you are something lesser than what you are. She studied him for a long moment. You are accustomed to women who fall into step. I do not fall. Then I shall learn to walk beside you. Dearest listeners, this was no dalliance. This was the beginning of something perilously sincere. But sincerity, as we all know, is the most dangerous scandal of all. Now, dearest listeners, if one were to stroll past the Burlington Arcade on a mild April morning and overhear whispers of a certain American girl causing tremors through the court, one might be forgiven for assuming the tale exaggerated. But rest assured, this chronicler has verified the matter with no fewer than 3 footmen and a very reliable milliner's apprentice. And the truth is indeed stranger and far more delicious than fiction. It began with an invitation. Not just any invitation, mind you. A summons to the royal stables at Windsor, issued under the prince's own seal. Miss Juliana Wetherford, whose previous equestrian experience consisted of dodging carriages in Boston, found herself face to face with a gray thoroughbred named Neptune and a royal groom who looked mildly alarmed. You ride, Prince Benedict said, not asked, as he mounted with the grace of a man who had never fallen from anything in his life, not even favor. I read books, Juliana replied, eyeing the saddle as though it might bite. Surely that counts for something. Then you'll enjoy the theory of balance, he said, and offered his hand. Now, it must be said, a lesser woman might have demurred or, worse, squealed. But our Miss Wetherford grasped the reins and the moment with equal resolve. She mounted, wobbled, and set her jaw with that particular American defiance that had once sent an entire empire into a panic. They rode slowly at first, the prince adjusting his pace to hers without appearing to do so. The path curved through budding elms and past low stone walls dotted with lichen. It was, in short, the sort of setting romantic poets misuse terribly. I take it the Queen does not approve of me, Juliana said, after a silence broken only by the clip of hooves. She prefers simplicity in her court, Benedict said. And I am not simple. You are not. Another pause. I've been told I'm too direct. You are. She glanced at him. and yet you continue to seek my company. That, Miss Weatherford, is because I am not simple either. Ah, but it is here, dear readers, where the tale begins to shift. For while the court continued to treat Juliana as an amusing aberration, Prince Benedict had begun to defend her in private with a tenacity that alarmed even his closest advisers. Take, for example, the breakfast incident at Kew. The prince had invited a small party to dine al fresco beneath the hawthorns. Among the guests was Lady Eugenia Trask, a baron's daughter with a mind like a ledger book and a voice like a cracked bell. When Juliana, seated beside the prince, corrected a quotation from Cicero accurately, one might add Lady Eugenia tittered behind her napkin. I had not realized Boston-bred philosophers. Benedict did not look up from his roll. No, only accuracy. Lady Eugenia turned a shade best described as boiled beet, and conversation shifted swiftly to the weather. Juliana, however, did not thank him. You mustn't fight my battles, she said later, as they strolled through the rose walk. Every time you defend me, you make me smaller. I did not realize you were so tall, he replied. I am, when I stand alone. Then I shall walk beside you, and keep silent. But I warn you, it is not my natural state. Now, dear hearts, you may be wondering, where, in this maze of witticisms and equine adventures, lies the romance? You must understand, this was no tale of fluttering fans or accidental hand touches during a quadrille. This was a courtship conducted in riddles and defiance, in stolen hours and unspoken truths. For Juliana, despite her feelings, which this author assures you were growing steadily inconvenient, remained firmly rooted in reality. You are not free, she said one evening, as they stood beneath an arbor heavy with wisteria. You are your country's son. Your heart is not your own. And yet, Benedict said, taking her hand with the care of a man handling something fragile and deeply necessary, it beats faster whenever you are near. She pulled away not because she did not believe him, but because she did. Meanwhile, the court had begun to conspire. Lady Sophronia Greaves, having failed to sway the prince, turned her efforts toward Queen Charlotte herself. A letter was sent, a masterpiece of veiled insinuation and maternal concern. It spoke of foreign influence, of unvetted companionship, and of the delicate matter of precedent. It reached the queen just as she was finishing her embroidery and was received with the sort of expression typically reserved for undercooked pheasant. The queen acted without delay. Juliana received a summons to St. James's. Not an invitation, a summons. She arrived in a gown of deep violet, with her hair pinned in a style chosen more for practicality than court fashion. She was ushered into a receiving room lined with damask and portraits of severe ancestors. The queen sat upright, her expression unreadable. You are Miss Weatherford, she said, without preamble. I am, Juliana replied, hands steady. You have spent considerable time with my son. Yes. You are aware of your position. I am aware of my person. The queen's gaze narrowed. You refuse to flatter. I prefer truth. And if the truth is inconvenient, then it is worth more. There was a long silence. Then the queen set down her embroidery hoop. You will dine with us on Thursday, she said. It was not a question. And so, dear listeners, the stage was set. A maid turned companion, scorned by society, had now been summoned not to be dismissed but to be tested. And the prince? He had made his choice long before the queen had made hers. It was on a dusky Thursday evening, just as the gas lamps flickered to life and the air turned cool enough to rouse gooseflesh, that Miss Juliana Wetherford dined with the royal family. And while most of the ton would sooner expire from tight lacing than admit it, the evening passed without incident unless, of course, one considers Princess Augusta's faint when Juliana corrected a misattribution of Dryden, or the Duke of Sussex's wineglass shattering mid-toast from a rather ill-timed elbow. But then, what is royalty without a touch of chaos? Now, dearest readers, one assumes a dinner at St. James's to be a solemn affair full of cold meats, colder glances, and enough silences to make a vicar weep. But that evening, something quite curious occurred. The queen asked Juliana her opinion. Not once, not twice, but 4 times. And in each instance, the reply was neither deferential nor rehearsed. It was, dare one say, human. Afterward, as the footmen cleared away the final course, a regrettable pudding that even Lord Yarmouth could not salvage with claret, The queen's eyes lingered on her guest for longer than custom allowed. No pronouncement followed, but her silence was weighted with something more than mere tolerance. Approval? Perhaps. Or, at least, the cautious interest one reserves for a pawn that might, with careful play, become a queen. The day following, London awoke to the news that Miss Wetherford had been seen exiting the palace in a carriage belonging to the royal household without a chaperone. The scandal should have been enough to set every bonnet in Mayfair ablaze. And yet, the expected outrage was strangely muted. Why? Because, dear hearts, scandal only thrives when it is unexpected. And by now, Juliana's defiance of propriety was practically fashionable. But let us not tarry with society's fickle affections. Something far more intriguing was unfolding at Richmond Park, where Prince Benedict had arranged a private picnic under the pretext of discussing philosophical matters. A few trusted servants managed the arrangements, while the man himself waited under a willow tree with the posture of someone attempting nonchalance and failing utterly. "You've gone to some effort," Juliana said, descending from the carriage with a brow slightly arched and not a trace of hesitation in her gait. "I've been accused of worse," Benedict replied, gesturing toward a blanket spread with modest fare. "Though I rather hoped you'd be impressed by the strawberries. They were acquired at great personal peril from Lady Moresby's hothouse." Juliana sat, smoothing her skirts with deliberate grace. "I was under the impression Lady Moresby kept her strawberries under lock." "She does. But her gardener is fond of noble causes. I hope you didn't bribe him." "Certainly not. I promised him a post in my stables. He prefers horses to horticulture, apparently." She let out a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close enough to satisfy him. "Why strawberries?" she asked, reaching for one. "Surely you could have summoned a 5-course meal and an orchestra." "Because strawberries are honest," he said. "They bruise easily and refuse to grow under false conditions. Rather like someone I know." Juliana held the fruit between her fingers. "If you mean to compare me to something sweet and seasonal, you've chosen poorly. I meant something rare and temperamental. And you think this will flatter me? I was hoping it would earn me another conversation." She took a bite, slow and deliberate. "You already have that. What you lack is certainty." His expression shifted only slightly, but enough to confirm what she suspected. He was not used to being seen so clearly. "I do not wish to make you a pet project, Juliana," he said at last. "Nor a rebellion. I've had my fill of both. I wish to change everything, to understand what I value, and why I've never valued it before." The breeze stirred the willow branches above them, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, not unkindly, "You are a prince. Your choices ripple beyond you. So I should choose in favor of ease. You should choose with your eyes open." He looked at her then not as a man assessing a conquest, nor a courtier weighing consequences, but as a man standing at the edge of something he could not name, but could no longer ignore. "I have already chosen," he said quietly. "I am only waiting to see whether I will be allowed to keep what I've found." Ah, dear listeners, one might have expected a declaration there, and then perhaps a kiss, or some florid promise of eternal devotion. But no, this was a different sort of courtship, one built not on whimsy, but on the gradual, stubborn accumulation of respect. Later that week, a curious shift occurred. Lady Sophronia Greaves, who hitherto had made it her life's work to extinguish Juliana's presence, was observed at Hatchett's purchasing an American history. Meanwhile, the Dowager Countess of Selbridge asked her clergyman whether any colonial women had ever become duchesses, and if so, what prayers might facilitate such a miracle. But while the Tun scrambled to rewrite its rules, Benedict requested an audience with the king. Now, this author must tread delicately, for what passed between father and son behind closed doors remains, even to the most determined eavesdropper, a mystery. However, the prince emerged with a set jaw and a letter sealed in gold. That very evening, he sent it to Lady Bexley's residence, addressed to the shock of every servant and stray cat in the vicinity to Miss Juliana Wetherford. As for the contents of that letter, well, let us just say that no woman who opened it would ever again doubt her worth. And yet, Juliana did not respond. Not immediately. Because, dear readers, what comes easily is never cherished. And what is cherished must be earned.